Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. So today I wanted to hop on here and just make a really quick video with no notes or anything, just about something I've been thinking about a lot recently. I started playing the Resident Evil 2 remake a couple of weeks ago and I've been obsessed with it. I love going around the police station, I love all the stupid shit that Leon says, but what I've noticed, being someone who is not really all that into the Resident Evil franchise, or at least sort of quite a newcomer to it compared to a lot of other seasoned gamers. The first game in the Resident Evil series I ever played was Resident Evil 7, and it's probably one of my favorite games of all time, despite the fact that I've only played it like 1.5 times. I really cannot think of another game I've ever played that has, I don't know if you call it set design in gaming, modeling, texturing, whatever, but I've never played a game that has more, layered and just completely immersive set dressing and sound design. And so, since I've sort of been noticing the differences between these two games, I thought that it would be interesting to just make a little video and talk about the thing that I've noticed the most, which is the fact that I really don't think the story and the sort of world of Resident Evil 7 fits into the world of Resident Evil. And why I think if the game was standalone or its own IP, they would have been able to create a much more cohesive narrative as well as the really intriguing and enthralling world that they throw us in. Because fundamentally, that's what I found so interesting and exciting about Resident Evil 7 was the world building, and I sort of felt in the first couple hours of the game, especially right in the beginning of the game before you have sort of any idea what's going on and you're going through the guest house and having all of these different interactions with Mia, seeing things written on the walls, especially because it's probably like the best paced or one of the best paced first hours or, introductions of a game, and especially a survival horror game I've seen. I find a lot of games, and a lot of games that I really like, tend to drag in the beginning, which seems to be really counterintuitive to me, but every step you take in that guest house brings with it more tension and more fear and apprehension towards what's gonna come. And all Resident Evil games are games where, you're sort of primed to be consistently backtracking. When I played the Resident Evil 2 remake, it just felt not nearly as sort of streamlined as like the show don't tell when it comes to, environmental puzzles. The first thing like that, it's seeing that one drawer or dresser in the hallway of the guest house, but you don't have a way to open it. And the second I was able to pick up those bolt cutters to go and get Mia out of the jail cell, I knew exactly where those were going to be used as well. As well as the fact that, throughout the entire game, the set design and lighting, it's so effective at making everything look scary. It really gives you the vibe of being a little kid and walking down the hallway to your room and oh my god, what was that? The coat rack that you think is a person. There's so many, environmental pieces that sort of inspire those feelings, as well as the fact that all of this atmosphere is so effective that you find yourself being scared of things that aren't even there. And I feel like you can really see that when you watch streamers play the game, especially in VR, because all of them are so terrified.
She's gonna turn around, she's gonna have a Satan face. Yep, I'm gonna turn around, she's gonna have a fucking Satan face! Oh, no Satan face.
Chris,
try dunking your head in it.
There's no zombie in the bathtub.
There is!
No, there isn't! Dunk your head in it!
So constantly, ready and on edge for the next jump scare, the next jump scare. But as the game goes on and sort of the more comfortable you are with the environment, as well as the more the story sort of starts to fall apart, then I find that none of these things that were so effective in the start really stick. I just felt like the mystery that they were building to, once we actually sort of started to see what that mystery was, all of the intrigue completely fell apart. And I think fundamentally, the way to combat that is to not have a story where that, last hour of this game even had to take place. Aside from, the very cool sort of reveal of the fact that the grandma was actually Eveline the whole time, I feel like the story that we get with Eveline and the ship and, all of the sort of actual backstory of Mia and everything, and the game that we were playing for the first couple of hours are two completely different games. And sometimes that works. There's a lot of media I like. This is 2 shows, or it's 3 movies, or it's, 8 games in one, or whatever. I just recently finished playing Sally Face for a different video I'm working on. Basically, the whole last episode is playing all these sort of different versions of Sally Face games and all of these varying styles, but, with similar mechanics. But that's something where that makes sense to the aesthetic, that makes sense to the story, everything sort of clicks together in this really nice way. Really fundamentally what I mean by all of this is the fact that, there's a lot of media that does a really good job of, sort of doing a complete 180 halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, whatever, and Resident Evil 7 just completely fell flat once we got there. And so instead of, going through the ways that I found that to sort of be so disappointing, instead, I want to talk about what I found so compelling about the initial part of the game. And it was the way that it seemed like that environment was going to service a much deeper, darker, truly Southern Gothic story about the ways that this family was being broken, the ways that they're sort of being imploded in on. And I just felt like each of these characters fit these very specific archetypes of these sort of Southern redneck hillbilly people.
How long do you say this place has been abandoned?
3 years.
So, Hillbilly Joe and his family go missing.
Not hillbillies, the Bakers. Jack and Marguerite Baker. And they were quiet, not backward. A lot of bad rumors about their son, Lucas. Bad seed, apparently.
You have the very authoritative father, this, nagging shrew of a wife, and, the, rebellious son, and the older daughter that's there to take care of everyone, but doesn't like doing it while she's doing it. Each of the members of the family will perform in their own ways the sort of actions that come from living in a nuclear family, living in a normal household, whether that's making dinner or checking in on your guests, making sure they're not having some time to lay low and party without, the adults being there or whatever. But just these sort of ways that, you watch this family be this very eerie, uncanny picture of what a family is supposed to be. I went back and played the Daughters DLC once I had finished the game, and I'm pretty sure that Jack mentions it at some point, near the end of the game. There's that weird dream sequence where he's talking to you all normal, but I didn't really believe him that they were a completely normal family before this girl showed up, and to sort of find out that that was actually true in the Daughters DLC, I didn't love, especially just because I felt like that house reeked of generations of trauma, years and years of something going deeply wrong at the core of whoever was living there. And so to sort of say, yeah, this girl showed up 6 months ago and all this crazy shit's happened, I think is kind of a cop-out in a way. And really speaks to the fact that, this was sort of developed from the ground up in terms of developing the game and sort of using the innovations that you're making on the technological side to then service the story side of it. And I really am curious to see sort of how this would have gone if it were the opposite way around, if the narrative itself would have then served the development of the game. I just expected this game to be much more about the actual repercussions that come from living in a traumatized family. The entire place just seem to speak to these endless cycles, you know, and literally like this building, this property, what is a home? It's supposed to be the domestic world, domestic life is supposed to be clean and caring and kind and warm or cozy. And so to then sort of have like literally this thing that's emblematic of modern American domestic life be cracked and crumbling and literally like rotting from the inside, I think really speaks to the way that like as each generation continues to pass on more and more trauma from years and years of all of this type of shit, younger people, you know, somebody like Zoe is finally learning the ways to be able to actually combat that and talk about and understand the systems that have made this type of pain be so real for so many people for so long. Which is also really interesting then that like she's the only one that isn't affected by the sort of infection as much as everybody else is, and that sort of speaks to the like eldest daughter curse.
It was foolish thinking I could escape.
And I find, you know, Zoe and Jack's relationship to be so interesting, especially like right as Jack is like fucking dying and he's this insane, gigantic monstrosity, and all he can do still is talk to her like she's a little child that's broke into the cookie jar, spilled her paint on the floor, didn't come down to dinner at the right time.
Get your ass back to the house. I will deal with you later.
For some reason, that was such like a striking moment for me to hear him in this insane state still be this, you know, very textbook abusive father. Not even abusive in that space, just strict and authoritative. And so a kind of tangential point to all of this is the ways, at least I thought a lot of this was going to sort of mirror the rise of Southern evangelicalism and the ways that that has sort of poisoned the well for a lot of rural people in the South or the Midwest when it comes to their political views or, you know, any of their views outside of their faith. These ideas of possession, of speaking in tongues, of this like otherworldly creature inhabiting your body and sinning through you. And this is actually a place where I kind of find that Eveline herself serves into this narrative that I enjoy, because so much of, you know, what ends up happening with her sort of puts her in almost like a cult leader like position where the family kind of wrongly sees her as a messiah that they sort of go and attack others to defend her.
All you have to do is accept her fucking gift!
Which, again, you know, feels very similar to ways that, like, religious extremists will look for any opportunity to go after anyone that doesn't share exactly their viewpoints. But this idea of Eveline making people prove their love and devotion through both masochistic and sadistic acts, as well as like the ways that the family talks about accepting her gift and sort of like preaching her and her ways. Again, just paint her in this very interesting and seemingly divine light, as well as like the ex-Christian narrative that then Zoe kind of falls into, and the ways that like she has branched out and sort of rejected the faith of her family, and you know, they consistently literally call her a traitor. They black her face out in photos.
Zoe's a stupid bitch. She doesn't understand that I don't want to go back to how things were before my father found y'all.
And as I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, I think there was so much more to do with Zoe's story, but I'm very interested in sort of this dynamic of like the family being against her for not accepting Eveline and her, you know, kind of keeping her rational head on her shoulders. And so the last thing that I was kind of expecting them to touch on a little bit more, Hurricane Katrina and sort of all of the cultural baggage. They're in Louisiana, and a giant storm is sort of the impetus for all of this, especially in terms of like destructed space, and literally the idea that, like, you know, mold comes from long-term water damage, as well as like the fact that the hurricane would have ended up destroying the property of a lot of people who came from money but didn't have money themselves. And that's kind of like what the Baker family feels like to me. So I think it might have been kind of an unfair characterization to call them hillbillies at first, because they sort of lay in this weird space between that. Because I mean, you can't have that much property without somebody having money at some point, which also goes back to the fact that, like, I literally don't get how in the narrative they were completely normal before Evelyn showed up, because there's like a file somewhere that says one of the secret hideout tunnels or whatever was built in the 90s, and Lucas has obviously been doing some shit for a while. So I mean, you know, if they have property this size that's been maintained for this long, like, that feels like something that would have been inherited. Which then brings up a much larger, even darker question about this idea of, like, space, houses, and land being able to sort of, like, hold on to and soak up trauma. The sort of connotations of slavery that come from a place like that. A giant property like this in the South probably wouldn't have existed without slave labor, or without, you know, a plantation that's being run around it or something. And not like I really think that Resident Evil is gonna, like, delve into the long, deep-seated American history of institutional racism against black people, but I do think it's sort of an interesting question to bring up how that would sort of fit into this cycle of trauma and, like, the land literally desecrating itself over it. The entire Baker property feels like it's tired of the violence and hatred that's come from it.
This house has seen more than you can imagine.
And if you could trace that back hundreds of years to something as horrifying and so normalized and institutionalized as slavery, that really adds, you know, a broader context to it. So, how would I have fixed this? I'm gonna be honest, I'm not completely sure. I don't have, like, a treatment written up or anything, but basically I would sort of strip it down to its core, and I would have it be much more about, you know, the central story around Ethan and Mia and the family. And if we're taking this out of the Resident Evil universe, then you can either have Evelyn not be in it at all, or you can have her be truly some sort of crooked messiah or some sort of supernatural being. Maybe she is sort of this, like, metaphorical product of all of the, like, violence and hatred that has existed in this place. And same thing with, like, the mold itself. I think it's interesting to have it be this sort of, like, metaphorical substance that kind of shows these festering cycles, you know, years and years of this family sort of unknowingly being poisoned by their own neglect or their own actions. And I'd also have all of this relate to Ethan and Mia's marriage a little bit more, you know, have Ethan and Mia maybe be narrative foils to Jack and Marguerite. Obviously, I know, you know, what happens in Village, but maybe Mia can't have a child. Maybe they escaped from abusive families themselves, something that makes them more than just objects. And the last thing is I would just spend a lot more time with Zoe, and whether that's actually being able to be with her more, hearing a little more on the phone calls, actually being able to, like, delve into her story in the trailer or something. You know, I don't think they really give us enough about her, which would mean we'd be able to get sort of answers to the questions of, like, what has Zoe's relationship been like with the rest of the family? What are the actual sort of technicalities of that? Why isn't she infected? Lastly, I'd really like to see a little more about Zoe and Mia's relationship, because I feel like there's a lot there, and there's a lot of sort of similarities and differences and, like, privileges and weaknesses.
I know you and Zoe are plotting. I know you were scheming.
And where, you know, the game didn't, but kind of should have, in my opinion, made Ethan and Mia narrative foils to Jack and Marguerite. I think they very much already do that with Mia and Zoe, especially like making you choose between them on the dock. And so I just would have liked to hear, is Zoe jealous of Mia? Is she angry? Does she empathize toward her? Is she sort of tiresomely taking care of her like she is getting Ethan through all of this? As I said in the beginning, this was the first Resident Evil game I played. It was my introduction to the franchise. That's why I'm really interested to hear what people have to say about this. If you've been a super fan of the Resident Evil franchise for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, did you think that this game fit into the series? You know, why or why not? Would you be interested in having seen this story without all of the ways that it relates back to this, you know, larger franchise narrative? Because I know that, you know, Resident Evil 7 was a really huge turning point for the franchise in so many different ways. It makes sense in a lot of ways of why this game turned out the way it did, and I think it's an incredible feat in sound design, and that's all, you know, thanks to the Reach the Moon engine that now they've been using for all the other games. And so I am really glad that this was a Resident Evil game that sort of restarted the franchise, but it just leaves me thinking about a lot of what could have been. And I hope that, you know, one day we'll be able to see some sort of game like what I've been talking about that sort of includes these elements and branches out in different ways than Resident Evil 7 did. So yeah, I hope this was coherent enough with no notes. I haven't even played the game in a couple of months, but I'm excited that I have to go back and replay it now to get a bunch of footage for this. As I said before, I am so interested to hear what people have to say in the comments. I'd love to know, you know, with your response, if you've only played this one, if you've played every single Resident Evil game, if you started like me and you played this one, but now you've played a couple. I just got a new laptop, which means I have this storage and the wherewithal on this fucking machine to be able to actually make more than one video at a time. And so with that, just expect that you're going to be seeing a little more from me than you normally do. If you like content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Maybe even put on the bell, get some notifications every time I post. And I'll see you next time.
Stay away.